So yeah, now into positional rankings where we will start with relief pitchers, which was very, very interesting to do because like there's a lot of options to put there. There's the variance that you have with like having 7 to 8 relievers on each team, whereas like, we're doing second base here, there's not 7 or 8 second basemen on each team. Then along with that, like um there's a closer on each team, and also like when we're talking about guys over their last 2 seasons, maybe they've thrown 120 innings, which is just not that much. So there's just a lot that can change on a year-to-year basis. So it's kind of hard to make these rankings, but it should be interesting to talk about them.
Am I going first?
Yeah, who's your number
All
10?
right. At number 10, starting this off, I have Camilo Doval of the San Francisco Giants. Camilo Doval has been kind of a dominant reliever ever since he came up midway through 2021. Last year, he put up his third consecutive season with an expected ERA below 3. He's done that every year since he's been in the majors. He also had a 52% ground ball rate and a fly ball and line drive rate, both at 20%. I like to see both of those at a very low rate. One of the things that he did this year was really develop his slider. His slider has been very good ever since he's gotten into the league, but this year in particular, he threw his slider 412 times, and he threw it. He did throw it more to lefties than to righties, which is interesting because I feel like as a right-handed pitcher, you're usually throwing your slider more to righties because it moves out towards them and into lefties. But he did throw it 263 times to lefties and 149 times to righties, and he had a 49.3% whiff rate on his slider, which was fourth highest among the 99 pitchers with 200 swings against their slider in 2023. Camilo Doval has been, I mean, he's been and obviously an excellent pitcher. He does get hit a little hard, but it's also mostly on the ground. He just walks some guys, and I don't know. I feel like it's very difficult to justify why I have 9 guys above him. I mean, I still think Camilo Doval is super talented. I mean, it took a lot for him to make this list. Yeah, I have him at number 10.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like there's so many like really, really good pitchers that have to be left off this list with like really good numbers, that like guys who have like sub 3 ERAs over the last 2 years that have to be left off. And just to correct myself from earlier, I think I have 7 closers on here because my number 10 I don't believe is going to be a closer. And this is I don't know if it's a wild card pick, but it's a guy who um like hasn't probably thrown as many innings as some of the other guys on this list, but I'm talking about Jose Alvarado of the Philadelphia Phillies. Um, just numbers wise, what he's been doing over the past 2 years has been pretty exceptional, especially peripherally. Among relievers with 90 innings over the last 2 years, he has the lowest FIP at 2.14. He also has the fourth highest strikeout rate and fourth highest strikeout minus walk rate. So those are things that just translate. Having the lowest FIP is likely going to translate, and having the highest strikeout rate and or not the highest strikeout rate, but one of the highest strikeout rates and one of the highest strikeout minus walk rates is something that typically translates. So that's something I'm excited with. However many innings he's going to pitch, I'm not sure. But with relievers, it's so hard to talk about whether they're going to be healthy or not, because some guys are just tapped out for a full year because of how hard they throw. But sometimes guys will surprise you and throw like 70 innings one year. So you really never know or can rely upon a guy throwing that many innings. So that's why I'm putting a guy with not as many innings over the past years and just has really, really good like inning per inning numbers. So Jose Alvarado gets the 10 spot for me. And now your number 9.
Phillips from the Dodgers. He put up a 114 ERA in 2022 and 63 innings pitched. He threw just about the same amount of innings last year and put up a 205 ERA. So, I mean, that success has been sustained. Every single one of his percentile circles is above the 59th percentile, or 59th percentile or above, I should say. So, I mean, he's obviously very good at everything. But his best pitch, his crown jewel, has to be his sweeper. It's the most commonly used pitch out of his arsenal. He's and also one very important thing to note, he's not afraid to throw it to either lefties or righties. Threw it 284 times to righties, 132 times to lefties. So maybe a little disproportionately more to righties, but regardless, he threw it every time he needed to. And his sweeper had a 111 batting average against last year. That was the second lowest, only to Sonny Gray. Minimum 300 sweepers thrown. His slugging percentage against of 194 was also second to Sonny Gray. So I mean, that's when you're primary. I mean, first of all, there's not a lot of guys that have a sweeper as their primary pitch, and to be able to have one, not be afraid to throw it to anyone, and have it have that much success is already tremendous. One thing that I kind of just love about Evan Phillips is that he threw 220 cutters and exactly one was to a righty, and the other 219 were to lefties, which I kind of just found amusing. Wasn't actually his best pitch, didn't get the best results, but regardless, I kind of enjoyed that. Yeah, I mean, he has a good four pitch arsenal. He doesn't throw his four seamer or his sinker a whole lot. It's about 19 and 11%, but he did get good results out of each of those last year. And yes, I mean, sweeper at 45.5% and having it have the stats that he got is just tremendous. So I put Evan Phillips in my 9 spot.
Yeah, that cutter thing is pretty funny because I feel like with a pitch with glove side movement like that, you'd want to throw it to righties. But yeah,
It's
interesting.
interesting. I actually looked it up, and it's pretty even, believe it or not, from righties.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's pretty interesting. Um, so yeah, on to my number nine. Shout out friend of the program, although there's no recorded evidence of it, but a nice Canadian fellow, Matt Brash, who has been dominant at least peripherally since he became a reliever, and a lot of my rankings are just what I think they will. These are rankings of what we think they're going to do in 2024, and I think a lot of my picks are guys where maybe I don't think they've been top 10 relievers in the game these past few years, but I think they're going to make their mark in 2024, and Matt Brash is one of those guys for me. He since becoming a reliever, so he started 2022 as a starter, struggled a little bit, had some control issues, went down to the minors and became a reliever. And ever since becoming a reliever, he's been an extremely good pitcher. He has a 2.84 ERA and 2.18 FIP as a reliever in his career. And among relievers with 100 plus innings over the last 2 seasons, he has the lowest FIP as a reliever. And he's also just coming off a year with a 25% strikeout minus walk rate and a sub 5% barrel rate. So, with his strikeout minus walk rate being as elite as it is, and him not allowing hard fly balls the way he is, that's just going to translate, especially in T-Mobile Park, pitcher friendly park. I really love the potential future of him, and also he was a major innings eater as a reliever through over 70 innings last year. So lots of things to be happy about with Matt Brash's performance, and I think that's going to continue in the next season. Who do you have as your number 8?
Yeah, my number 8, I have a different Seattle Mariner. I have Andres Munoz in my 8. Unfortunately, he spent some time on the injured list last year and only threw 49 innings compared to 65 last year. That's like a month and a half's work of innings that he missed out on. But there are some things he did last year that I really liked, even compared to his 2022, which was objectively his better season. He had a lower ERA, better strikeout numbers. But anyway, he had a 59% ground ball rate last year and a 13.7% fly ball rate. His fly ball rate went down over 10%. And his ground ball rate went up by 6.5%. So, he did a lot of excellent things with his batted ball profile this year. He actually started throwing a sinker, well, pretty much a lot more. He only threw it well, how many times in 2022? He threw two sinkers in 2022, and he threw it 19% of the time in 2023. And he got kind of the most insane results on it, by the way. A negative 22 average launch angle on his sinker, which is like you're supposed to do that on sinkers, but he went even beyond that. So to add that to his already insane arsenal with a filthy slider and a fastball that averages 99 miles an hour with like average extension is pretty remarkable. I would love to see what he does in a full year, but I mean, he's already, I mean, I think he already has one of the best profiles in terms of like stuff in general. Um, and he actually also has pretty decent control. I mean, it definitely got a lot worse last year, but a 6% walk rate in 2022, obviously a strikeout rate well above 30%. And yeah, I would love to see what if he can continue to throw that sinker, keep it in his arsenal, and then see if there's a good healthy mix between the three, and then some more volume.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so much potential with him. Averages over 99 on his fastball, which is pretty remarkable. Um, Speaking of, I mean, most of these guys are hard throwers, but speaking of another hard throwing guy with like 100th percentile fastball velocity, my number 8 is Yoan Duran. He's interesting to evaluate because, FIP numbers went down or FIP numbers went up, which is bad last year, but also like he just has he's just had a good track record since he's become like a good consistent reliever. And in the last 2 years, and it just makes a lot of sense considering his rankings, why I put him number eight, because in the last 2 years, among relievers with 100 plus innings pitched, he ranks eighth in ERA, eighth in strikeout rate, and eighth in strikeout minus walk rate. So yeah, I put him number 8. Also, expected numbers wise, he's also pretty elite. Out of 134 relievers with 1,500 plus pitches thrown in the last 2 seasons, he has the 6th lowest expected slugging and 5th lowest expected WOBA. He's pretty tremendous at getting ground balls along with strikeouts as well. So yeah, there's some cool things about Yoan Duran. I think some people would put him top 5. I'm a little bit hesitant, but I definitely see a case for him. There's so much variance with this list in general, and I think we're going to see that as we go along. But who's your number 7?
Number 7, a guy that kind of surprised me a lot. I knew that he was very good and I expected to have him on this list, but I was not ready to be that impressed by David Bednar, who I put in my 7 from the Pittsburgh Pirates. First of all, the Savant page obviously jumps out at you. 95th percentile expected ERA at 284, 95th percentile in expected batting average below 200. He actually he averages 96 miles per hour with 6.7 feet of extension, so the perceived velocity is better. He has a very good barrel rate, but most notably, a 96th percentile chase rate and an 89th percentile whiff rate. So, obviously there's a lot of things he's very good at. He's good at getting swing and miss, good at striking guys out, and also his walk numbers in like the first half of last year were like insane. I think he walked like 2 guys in like April and May combined or something like that. And it did balance itself out a little more throughout the season, but I want to get that exact number because it was like ridiculous. From March 30th through June 23rd, David Bednar walked a grand total of one person. Allowed one home run. He had a 161 ERA and a 140 FIP. And it did, he did lose a little bit of command, but I mean that's also an insanely high bar. It's not even fair to compare. But the thing that really stuck out to me about David Bednar, which I haven't talked about, was I noticed he gave up 3 home runs last season in 67 and a third innings pitched and had a 30% fly ball rate, 30.1% to be exact. And I was like, okay, how can that be? How do you allow so many fly balls, but only 3 leave the park? And I looked into it, and for one, 44% of his fly balls given up were straight away. And obviously, that's the most difficult place to hit a home run in a ballpark, center field, kind of goes anywhere. But the biggest thing was that on his pulled and straight away fly balls, the average exit velocity was 87 miles an hour, which was, I believe, the third lowest minimum 50 fly balls allowed. So, even with David Bednar having a bit of an erratic batted ball profile, the soft contact he gives up is so key, and it gives him. I mean, that's why the expected batting average is so low, right? Because you're giving up so many weak fly balls that aren't getting out at any part of the ballpark. David Bednar did an extraordinary job at that last year, and then for that reason and for many others, he's my number 7.
Yeah. Good. Solid analysis right there. My number 7 is a guy who's really only had one really good season, but with how great it was last year, I had to give him some top 10 love. Um, he's someone I put as the how about that last year. One of my reliever diving. I'm talking about Tanner Scott of the Miami Marlins. He had an unreal transformation last year. Led all relievers in FWAR last year. That is pretty remarkable. He had the second best FIP out of relievers with 50 plus innings pitched, and he was 96 percentile or higher in barrel rate, hard hit rate, average exit velocity, strikeout rate, whiff rate, chase rate, and expected ERA. All those major categories, he was 96 percentile or better in. At most, 4% of the league was better than him in those categories, which is pretty remarkable, which is why even after just one season, I have to have him top 10. He sort of had his own, shout out to you with Robbie Ray, but he had his own like Robbie Ray transformation.
He did.
Where he kind of like um much of his pitching style or pitching ability was around the same except for his walk rate. He cut his walk rate by more than half last year. He went from almost 16% to below 8%, which was pretty remarkable. And that's the difference between him being an average reliever and an elite reliever. So if he keeps that up, he's definitely a top 10 pitcher, and I'm or a top 10 reliever, and I'm relying on him to keep that up. So shout out to Tanner Scott at number 7. Who do you have as your number 6?
Yeah, number 6. This is where I put one of the bigger names, certainly among relievers, a guy that we talked about recently. This is where I put Josh Hader, believe it or not. It took a lot for me to keep him out of the top 5, but I feel like for sustainability, I did try to look at the last 2 years for relievers. And not always, but I mean, Josh Hader was particularly concerning in 2022. I mean, his expected numbers were a lot better, but he had a 5.22 ERA. His home run rate ballooned that year. And guys were kind of just hitting him a lot harder, generally speaking. So I ended up leaving him out of the top 5, despite being one of the best, maybe the best. I mean, there's a case for him at number 1, to be completely honest. A lot of what really concerns me is uh, the fact that he's going to be pitching in Houston now. And I think we talked about this last week, but he's a guy that, despite being a sinker baller, gives up a lot of fly balls. He did do a good job of keeping guys from pulling the fly balls this year. But if that does come back to hurt him, it's going to be really bad for him with the short right field and the Crawford boxes in left. And also just kind of sneak peeking it. He gave up 3 home runs last year, and he would have given up 6 in Houston. So I did leave him out of the top 5 because I am a little skeptical of what he's going to look like in Houston, and also the 2022 is still kind of a haunting thing for me. But I did put him at 6. But I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
again, you still can't deny, even with all of that concern, you still can't deny his talent and his ability to strike guys out. His ability last year to allow soft contact, he did a much better job of that this year. His extension, giving him more perceived velocity. His breaking stuff, his slider as well. You can't deny it.
yeah, 100%. And yeah, like uh to add more to the talk, we talked for like 10 minutes about his sinker, I think a couple weeks ago, and it was a fun conversation because I was very interested in it. Also, like one bit note of research that I did on my own was when he throws his sinker in the lower third of the strike zone in his career, the slugging against is like 450 something, and when it's in the upper third it's like 30 something, which is, it's almost reverse of what usually happens. But usually when you throw sinkers up in the zone, it's worse for you. But with Josh Hader, it seems to be better with him. But yeah, going to Houston, yeah, I did see those like home run numbers by ballpark numbers, and those did pop in my mind for sure, and they definitely were in consideration for me. With my number 6, this is another guy similar to Hader, like sort of a legacy guy, or at least has been over the past few years. But with this guy, his performance dropped a little bit last year, but was still very good, but not with the elite of some of the guys I have above him. But I'm talking about Emmanuel Clase. Granted, he did lead in saves, but still, we have to talk about more than that. With Emmanuel Clase, In terms of the longer term, he's the leader among relievers in FWAR over the last 2 years. But breaking it down to last year, he did have some alarming drops in strikeout rate and ground ball rate, which is kind of his bread and butter. He was very good at he was very good at striking batters out, and he was very good at getting the ball on the ground. And as part of a result of him giving up less ground balls, more line drives, more fly balls, that resulted in increases in average exit velocity and barrel rate. And that's part of why his ERA more than doubled. His ERA went from 1.36, I believe, to 3.22, which is, takes you from number 1 to number 6 for me, because I probably would have had him top 2 heading into last year. But because of those drops in strikeout rate and ground ball rate, increases in barrel rate and average exit velocity, and his ERA going up so high, even if it was good, I kind of have to take him out of the top 5 for that reason. Who do you have as your number 5?
So at number 5, this is where I put a guy you previously mentioned, an ARR alum, friend of the program. This is where I put Matt Brash of Team Canada and also of the Seattle Mariners. He has, I believe, a 218 FIP ever since he became a reliever and
Correct.
0.27 home runs per 9. Walk numbers are a little up there, but he's still only going into his age 26 season, his 3rd full season in the majors. So, I have faith that he has time to figure out the walks. And even then, his walk rate was still 34th percentile, which is not that bad considering a K rate in the 98th percentile and a whiff rate in the 98th percentile. So he certainly makes up for it. Earlier I mentioned with David Bednar how he had a very low exit velocity on his pulled and straight and his opposite field fly balls. Matt Brash was the lowest on that list at 84 miles per hour on his pulled and opposite field fly balls. He had also 3 home runs allowed last year, also a 30.1% fly ball rate and 70.2 innings pitched. And he had very similar analysis to David Bednar, except this time he comes with one of the best sliders, certainly one of the best looking sliders in all of baseball. It had a 48.5% whiff rate last year, a 30.5% put away rate. Having a 30.5% put away rate on your best pitch, or on your primary pitch, I should say, is kind of insane. He almost had more strikeouts than he did batted balls against his slider, 71 strikeouts to 79 batted balls, which is absurd to have over a full season. He does need a little bit of work on his secondary pitches. His fastball and curveball, cutter and sinker did not produce the greatest stats last year. I mean, he did get, a good number of whiffs, healthy number of whiffs on all of them, but when hit and play, they were but I mean, you can't deny how ridiculous his slider is and how much one pitch is able to carry his entire arsenal. He's another guy that's not afraid to throw it to anyone. He threw it 369 times to righties, 290 times to lefties. So not even really like disproportionate to one side. Looks pretty even to me. A good healthy mix of pulled straightaway and opposite field. Pretty even on all fronts there. But yeah, I have Matt Brash in my 5 because I think there's still improvements he can make, and I believe he absolutely should and will make. That will make him even better. So I have him in my 5.
Yeah, for sure. And just visually watching that slider, it's like, whoa.
Absolutely. I mean, I've seen it in person.
Yeah, it
Yeah, it's
is.
special.
It's like, is that even real? Is this AI? Who's
Yeah.
doing this? Yeah, but we kind of flip-flopped on Seattle relievers.
Hmm.
And I understand why you put Brash ahead of this guy, but I'm talking about Andres Munoz is my
Yeah.
number 5. Part of this is like, this might be my most like vibey pick, like sort of just feeling out the energy, feeling what the world is giving me, the energy that the world is giving me, and thinking what's going to happen for 2024. And I think part of me putting Munoz at number 5, despite some drop in performance last year, is just like I'm still so amazed with what he was able to do in 2022. He had an expected ERA of 1.84 that year. That just doesn't happen. It's pretty exceptional, and he was so great at preventing hard contact, along with getting a high whiff rate. Even last year, he had a 39% whiff rate. That's insane. It's absolutely insane. So, I think I'm just thinking that he's going to track back more to that 2022 self, because I think he's heading into his age 25 season. But yeah, there are some things like looking at last year, why, he may have dropped down some guys' lists or just fallen out of the list completely, because I think his strikeout rate dropped. His ERA increased and his expected ERA increased by more than a full run. So what I'm going with here is thinking about what he was able to do in 2022 and thinking that, with his stuff, with that amazing slider and with that high velocity fastball, he's going to be able to be a top 5 reliever again. So yeah, it's just kind of more of a feeling the energy out with Andres Munoz, and we've seen how great he is, and was still very good last year. He didn't really fall off a crazy amount, although a little bit incrementally.
Yeah, if
Go
we
ahead.
did this list last year, I probably would have had him in like the 3 or 4, I would imagine.
Yeah, yeah.
Because he was that good. In my number 4, I took another guy that you mentioned earlier. I took Johan Duran. Uh, I refuse to believe anyone hits well off this guy. Like, he had one of the higher home run rates among people that are on this list for us. He gave up 6 home runs last year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but it is for a reliever, especially a reliever with a 15% fly ball rate. Every time I see a guy hit a home off him or like make hard contact, I'm like, no, they had to have gotten lucky. Um, yeah, it feels like we still haven't seen the best out of Johan Duran results wise. I mean, stuff wise, we know it's there. He casually has a fastball that averages 101.8 miles an hour. Like it's nothing. He put up an expected ERA of 260 last year, an expected batting average of 185, a ground ball rate at 66.2%, which is only like 11 points behind Andre Palante, which is pretty remarkable. Um, and yeah, like I mean, first of all, like the four seamer is what it is, right? I mean, it's a dart, it's 102. I almost really wonder what it would look like if there was a more even balance between his four seam, his curve, and his splitter, because the splitter is like really the famous one, right? I mean, it didn't get the best results last year, but a negative 14-degree launch angle is awesome. Somehow his split finger had the lowest whiff rate of all of his pitches. Um, by quite a large margin actually. But it did have the highest put away rate, so I would imagine he throws it a lot with 2 strikes or a decent amount with 2 strikes. Yeah, I mean this definitely is a more field pick than anything else, but he has a negative launch angle for his career, negative 2.3, had a negative 3.7 last year, and this is definitely a sort of investment pick. Like I know that he hasn't gotten the best. I mean, he's gotten very good results, but he hasn't gotten number 4 reliever in the league type results, but I feel like those can easily be coming.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And yeah, none of these guys that we're putting on the list are coming off like actual down years, like actual years where they were below average
Yeah.
pitcher. It's just the standard for being a
Yeah.
top 10 reliever is so high, at least on a rate basis. Like if you're like Emmanuel Clase had a 3.22 ERA last year, which is really good, but like he fell completely off of MLB Network's top 10, and it was you kind of understood why.
It's Relievers are capable of so many magical things that when they look human, it's like, wow, this guy sucks.
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially like elite relievers.
Yeah, exactly. 100%, 100%. So my number 4, you may have him higher. I imagine you would have him on the list, but I'm talking about Ryan Helsley. Um, or maybe you won't have him on because he was injured last year, but Ryan Helsley, among relievers with 100 plus innings over the last 2 years, he is top 3 in ERA, FIP, strikeout rate, and strikeout minus walk rate. Those are like maybe the 4 most important numbers to me when evaluating these pitchers, or at least with the top 3 with ERA, FIP, and strikeout minus walk rate. Tremendous to be top 3 in all of those. Granted, he only threw 36 innings last year, but it's kind of hard to project health, especially with relievers and pitchers in general. So like, yeah, like if he goes out and throws 65 innings this year, I have no reason to believe he won't be an amazing reliever. And along with that, that doesn't include the expected ERA, but expected ERA wise, last 2 years 2.04 and 2.25. That is remarkable. Really, really good stuff. He didn't qualify for percentiles this last year, but he was 99th percentile in 2022 in terms of expected ERA. So quality of contact and barrel rate have not been alarming either, or at least alarming enough. Very good sweet spot rate numbers each of the last 2 years. His barrel rate was cut by more than half last year, which was really good. That barrel rate was would have been like probably 90th percentile or higher last year if he did qualify. So yeah, I mean, all the numbers really, really favor Ryan Helsley. So that's, you could argue to have him higher than 4, but I have him at number 4 right now.
I'll tell you right now, I put him at my 11.
Oh yeah,
Yeah. It hurt because I really wanted to put him, but I think the thing about relievers is like with how good some people can be, like a down year can put you from number 3 to a number 11.
that's true.
And like I wouldn't be surprised if Ryan Helsley has the fourth best reliever season next year. But like coming off that, I always try to do safer picks, so to speak. Or I don't want to say I try to, but like it's easier to make the safer picks, and it's like, when you're coming off of a not a down year, but an injury year where you regressed a bit, like it can be tough.
Right, right, right,
Um,
right.
but the guy in my 3 is coming off of a remarkable year. It is Tanner Scott. I put him in my 3.
Hmm.
Um, it's very weird because you certainly don't, he's a name that you wouldn't have expected to have the third best reliever season, and even looking at his name, it felt like it could be a fluke, but I think this could be who he is. I mean, given the vibe, right? He feels like the kind of guy that, maybe thrives off of not walking people, has like a slightly above league average strikeout rate, gets soft contact, good lefty, maybe primarily faces lefties. No, he's the makings of an elite reliever in every sense of the word. He has a good fastball. He has good breaking stuff. He only throws 2 pitches, and they're pretty evenly thrown. But both of them are elite. Looking into it last year, his slider produced a run value of 16, which doing that as a reliever is insane. That's very difficult to do. And his four-seam fastball had a run value of 9. So both of his pitches were beyond elite last year. Both of them move very well, particularly his slider moves above average in both horizontal and vertical movement. He strikes out a lot of guys to the degree of a 98th percentile strikeout rate, 33.9%. Only a 7.8% walk rate. A lot of these guys had have struggles with their command, but it doesn't really matter because of how absurd their strikeout numbers are. No, Tanner Scott had a 60th percentile walk rate. He was an above average pitcher in walk rate while being among the best in strikeout rate. So he did that. He also upped his ground ball rate to 50%, which I like. He had a very low fly ball rate. Line drive rate around the league average, which is fine. Yeah, I didn't, Tanner Scott does not have the vibe of a top 3 reliever, but his numbers say that he is, and I think he can continue to be that in 2024.
Yeah, yeah. His it was pretty remarkable to see what he did last year, and like looking at the Baseball Savant page and seeing how bright that red is in every single category was
Mhm.
that was what really sold it for me. My number 3 is a different lefty reliever, a guy who definitely his success definitely goes beyond 2023. It's Josh Hader. And yeah, like I typically do, and I definitely understand looking at it on a 2-year scale, because I typically do look at all of these rankings and look at all these players on a 2-year scale or maybe 3-year scale sometimes. But with how much of an outlier 2022 was for Josh Hader, I'm not considering it as much as I would another pitcher, because that really did take place in the span of 19 appearances last or in 2022. Those first 27 appearances that he had a 105 ERA and 171 FIP. Then he had the worst maybe 2 months of his life. And then his final 10 appearances, he had a 0 ERA and 0.97 FIP. And then last year he goes on to have goes on to win reliever of the year, I believe, with a 1.28 ERA, something like that. But nonetheless, last year he had the third lowest ERA among relievers with 50 plus innings pitched, and he has 99th percentile expected ERA in 2018, 2019, 2021, and 2023. So that's all years except for 2020, which was the shortened season, and then 2022, where he had the worst 2 months of his life on the mound, which was like, it was pretty astounding, like how bad it was. But it seems like he's flipped the switch and turned it back on to regular Josh Hader form. So I'm just kind of relying on him to be back at that level. The Crawford boxes thing, that does play a bit of a factor, but I feel like I'll have to see it to see what impact it may have. Yeah, now on to your number 2 reliever in baseball for 2024.
Yeah, my number two. I feel like the top two, it can be interchangeable in order, but it's a pretty clear top two. I have Devin Williams in my two, a guy that we mentioned earlier, who I think maybe the Brewers should trade if they're gonna go down this route of selling. But let's talk about what he did, whether it be last year, whether it be 2 years, his whole career. Uh, and I mean, when you're talking about Devin Williams, you're talking about changeups, right? That's just what you're doing. Very famously, the airbender is among the best pitches in the league. He's consistently put up in 3 of the last 4 years, including 2020. His changeup has had a run value above 10, which is a count stat that relievers very rarely get to. He's done it 3 times with one pitch, which is remarkable. He has thrown 1,406 changeups with 40 inches of downward movement and 17 inches of arm side movement over the last 4 years. Nobody else has done more than 421, and he has done 1,406, which is also a very famous number in baseball lore to begin with. Looking into it, otherwise, his four seam fastball would be most pitchers. Pitchers, there are guys that would kill to have Devin Williams' fastball as their primary pitch, and that is his very clear secondary pitch. He averages 94.2 miles per hour, but he gets the most extension off the mound of any pitcher in baseball, 7.7 feet of extension. So his fastball is really more like 96 miles an hour, even though it's 94, which is an incredibly important thing. That's a major difference maker. That's how he got a 177 batting average with a 274 slugging and pretty similar expected numbers off of his four-seamer last year. That's also how he got a 41.8% whiff rate and 31.3% put away rate on his four-seam fastball. This is an ace type pitch, and it's his secondary pitch, which says so much more about his changeup than anything else. But I think anyone who knows about Devin Williams understands how good his changeup is to begin with. He does have walk issues, but he struck out 37.7% of all batters faced last year. He gets good chase numbers, good whiff numbers, soft contact, better than most anyone in the league. A very good ground ball rate. And all of it culminates to, like I said, the second best reliever in the league going into 2024.
Yeah, for sure. And that extension point is pretty interesting because he's only, I mean, for a human it's tall, but for an MLB pitcher it's actually below average. He's 6'2".
Yeah, he's 6'2".
I think maybe he might have some longer arms or whatever, but also just good stride and whatnot. So, and seems to get good extension, which is pretty cool. But for my number 2, get your trumpets ready because we're talking about Edwin Diaz, who is coming back from his torn patellar tendon injury, which he suffered at the World Baseball Classic, and is coming back for 2024. When talking about Edwin Diaz, you can't talk about him without talking about how historic that 2022 season was. I mean, a 50% strikeout rate, 42% strikeout minus walk rate, and 0.90 FIP. That was absolutely historic. And why I don't have him number 1 off of that season is just because he was never at that level before his career. He was always very good, or at least most of the time very, very good, but never quite at that level. And also coming off an injury, I'm not sure that he is going to be, a sub 1 FIP pitcher, albeit I think he'll have an ERA and FIP, around 2 or something like that, which is very much, that is an elite reliever status. So you kind of have to do some guesswork, but based off that 2022, he is an amazing relief pitcher, and hopefully will recover from that injury pretty nicely. So yeah, your number one reliever in baseball for 2024.
Is Edwin Diaz. He put up an impossible season in 2022. Again, a 50.2% strikeout rate, a 49.9% whiff rate. Half of all swings taken against Edwin Diaz pitches were missed. That is impossible. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't know what else there is to say. A 1.69 expected ERA. We talk a lot about how expected statistics kind of rubber band each other. You know, it's very hard to have an expected batting average above 300, even though it's kind of normal to have a regular batting average above 300. It's impossible practically to have an expected ERA at 1.69, even though a 1.69 ERA in a season out of a reliever is, it's not that much of an anomaly. Um, you can't. I mean, putting him at number two is fine as well because I get it. He missed the whole season, but uh, if you remember, Chris, I put him in my single seasons draft midway in August of 2022. Uh, because that's how good it was. Like that season was so good that I was willing to look at every single season a reliever has ever had and be like, you know what? I'm gonna gamble on these last 2 months of Edwin Diaz and say that it's gonna be there when it's all said and done. And it was. It absolutely was. He lived up to that. Um he has better walk numbers than Devin Williams did last year. Um he does have him there. The extension is also very good with Edwin Diaz, and his slider is, I mean, it's everything, right? I mean, it's very far above the league average in velocity. A 91 mile per hour slider on average is very difficult. 2022 was actually the first season of his career where he threw his slider more often than his fastball. He threw it 313 times to righties, 226 times to lefties. So, a fair amount to both. Only one home run given up in 539 pitches. In fact, one extra base hit given up in 539 pitches, a 114 batting average, 134 slugging, similar expected numbers, a launch angle in the single digits, so that produced a lot of ground balls, a 54.7% whiff rate, 38.4% put away rate. Um, I could go on and on and on, but I can't. You know what? I know that he missed the season, and I get that that's probably a large part of the reason he's not in the one, but you can't just act like he didn't do that in 2022, and that's why I'm putting him in my one.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I think part of also why I may have put another guy above him is like, that season did happen, but it is one season. And, over the looking at a 2-year sample from 2021 to 2022, ERA was at 2.38, but that FIP was 1.70, which is pretty
Yeah, I mean,
remarkable.
I know I said earlier I try to look at a 2 year span, and that's, I do remain consistent on that, but that season gets a pass because of how absurd it was.
Yeah, understood. Understood. So now my number one reliever is where your number two was. It's Devin Williams. And part of this might be just a shout out to him for like his entire career, or at least since 2020 when he was a rookie. It's just been he's just hasn't had a hiccup. He's been consistently great all 4 years. Whereas I think most of the players on this list either haven't been in the league for 4 years, or within those 4 years have had maybe a little bit of a hiccup where they weren't an elite reliever. Devin Williams has been an elite reliever since he was a rookie, which you can't say about every single person on this list. Among relievers with 150 plus innings since the start of 2020, Williams has the lowest ERA and second lowest FIP and second highest strikeout rate. And I get looking on a 4-year scale is a little bit long, but I'm just trying to emphasize, like, he has been amazing all throughout. His worst year was 2021, and he had a 2.50 ERA. That's just very, very elite. And I think he's just going to continue that. And he's just one of the more reliable guys on this list, and I think that has a value in its own right. Maybe he doesn't have the highest ceiling of this group, but I think he does have. He just has a great track record, and he also has youth on his side. He's not. I think he's age 28 or 29 or something like that season. So yeah, I don't see that performance dwindling anytime soon. And yeah, he's just been he's been like the class of the reliever position because when talking about the class of the reliever position, Edwin Diaz, obviously historic 2022, but not as good of a 2021. Josh Hader obviously had his blow up in 2022. Ryan Helsley has only been around for like 2 years. Same with Andres Munoz. Emmanuel Clase's numbers got a little bit worse last year, whereas Devin Williams has just been in the cream of the crop. Just consistently for 4 years now. So that's why I put him number one. Shout out to Devin Williams. Yeah, do we want to mention our honorable mentions, because there were a lot of guys I really considered.
Yeah. I mentioned earlier that Ryan Helsley was my 11. I went very back and forth between he and Camilo Doval before eventually landing on Doval. Ryan Presley was one of my honorable mentions. Brian Abreu, Ryan Walker, both of my underrated reliever picks from the all underrated team were in my consideration. I wanted to get Minter up and moving, but I decided against that, unfortunately. There were definitely others as well. Clase was one of them, obviously. He didn't end up making my list. I deleted them, but there were others.
Yeah, my guys that I
Chris
had,
Martin.
yep, my guys I had in consideration were Camilo Doval, who probably was my 11 as well. He was your number 10. I also was considering David Bednar, who you had as your 7. Brian Abreu, like you mentioned, Chris Martin, like you mentioned, Evan Phillips just missed the list. I think part of it is just I feel like that underlying numbers suggest maybe his ERA might rise a little bit, and which is which like if you're not projected to have like an ERA below 2.5, you can't just be in the
Get
list.
out of here.
Also, Pete Fairbanks in consideration as well, considering how great his numbers have been over the last 2 years, but he's just been kind of injured as well.
Barry.
Yeah, so yeah, but to review our 10 through 1, I'll start with mine. It goes Jose Alvarado number 10, Matt Brash number 9, Yohan Duran number 8, Tanner Scott at number 7, Emmanuel Clase at number 6, Andres Munoz at number 5, number 4 was Ryan Helsley, number 3 was Josh Hader, number 2 is Edwin Diaz, and number 1, Devin Williams.
Yeah, so for my number 10, I had Camilo Doval. Number 9, Evan Phillips. Number 8, Andres Munoz. Number 7, David Bednar. Number 6, Josh Hader. Number 5, Matt Brash. Number 4, Yohan Duran. Number 3, Tanner Scott. Number 2, Devin Williams. And number 1 was Edwin Diaz.
Fantastic. Well,
That first trumpets in 2024 is gonna hit so different.